teeth were essential to living a healthy life. If teeth went bad, toxins could enter the body and make a person ill. When a person lost their teeth and could no longer eat easily, they began to waste away. The chances of a naturally missing tooth were 1 in 10. It was possible that any 3 given people would each be among that 10%. However, for them all to be in the same place and all missing the same relatively unusual tooth, it began to seem less and less like a coincidence. Relatives often share certain traits. For example, consort Lishu cannot eat white fish. Do you happen to have the same dietary restriction? Aryu asked suspiciously. How did you know that? It was simple enough. I noticed how upset you were by the fish platter at dinner. It's hard to believe a man as old and mature as you would react so strongly just because he didn't like the food. She remembered how he had sent the tray of fish flying. And I am certainly confident that no high official of this nation would treat someone so poorly because of simple personal preferences or misunderstandings. Maomao smiled thinly and looked from Aryu to Lishu and back. Perhaps you might show your other daughter some parental affection from time to time. Maybe, she thought, she had gone a little far. But now even the densest listener would grasp her point. She hoped that would do the trick. She had provided as much of an answer as she could. Epilogue. It really does get cold, Maomao thought. She had a light wrap around her shoulders, but she was still shivering. She was definitely regretting not having another cup of wine. It would have been warmer inside the building, but frankly, there was too much trouble within its walls. She worried about what would happen to the lion now that its nose was broken. However, she wasn't feeling compassionate enough to help the big cat if it meant risking being eaten herself. Yes, the lion was just a poor animal who had been caged and put on display, but it had still attacked someone. Lahan had nonetheless thought it would be a waste not to try to fix the creature. He had attempted to get Maomao to do the job. He clearly saw the tousle-haired beast as another beautiful collection of numbers. He wouldn't stop talking about how the shattered nose disrupted that beauty. That was when she escaped out here. The sky seemed so vast. There was no moon, and the stars appeared to shine all the brighter. 3 of them shone brightest of all, forming a triangle in the heavens. Perhaps those stars were the 2 lovers and the river that separated them. Maomao wished they would hurry and wrap things up inside. She was just contemplating whether there might be a way for her to sneak back to Jayukyuan's mansion when she heard footsteps behind her. Your honored cousin is looking for you. It is perfectly all right to just ignore him. So Maomao was not the only one who had fled the hubbub. Don't you have more work to do? She asked. Basin had stolen the spotlight when the lion attacked, but surely this man could still be of some help. Are you hoping I'll drop dead from sheer overwork? Perish the thought, she said. Jinshi, who had ducked away from his responsibilities, didn't seem to think her answer was entirely sincere. The wooden bench creaked softly as he sat down beside her. Then he set something between them. It appeared to be a piece of metal. Jinshi said Basin was right, it was weak. Quality iron would have held together better. There were a number of ways of casting iron. If you got it wrong, the inside could turn out hollow, weakening the structure. It's almost like someone wanted it to break. An unsettling idea. Maomao had been wondering something as well. It was about the way the lion had gone straight for consort Lishu, as if specifically targeting her. It had seemed to ignore Maomao in favor of the consort. Was it simply because it was starving? She thought that was a possibility. Perhaps it was because she had been holding meat. That was another possibility. But Maomao could not stop thinking about the perfume the consort had been doused in. A scent so pungent would certainly have been detectable to a wild animal. Could that be what drew the lion's attention? Maomao sat and thought quietly. Hey, don't just go quiet, Jinshi said after a moment. He should have known by now that Maomao rarely started a conversation. Why had he decided to sit beside her anyway? He should stop slacking and get back to work already. I suppose you are wishing I would just go back to work, said Jinshi. Me, sir? Never. He did know what she was thinking occasionally, and that was the trouble with him. Maomao had to work very hard to pretend that her face didn't want to convulse into a major scowl. If I went back, one of 2 things would happen. I would have to work, or I would be surrounded by women. The less popular men in the world might want to see your head on a platter when they hear you complain about such things. Men who had money, status, and good looks were just different. A moonless night like this he ought to be more careful. What they're really after is the imperial blood, don't you think? Jinchi said, meaning his children, she supposed, or perhaps his life. I should think at least half of it is your looks, sir. Don't say that. Jinchi frowned as if he'd eaten a particularly unpleasant bug. For some reason, even though he possessed beauty beyond virtually anyone Maomao had ever seen, he seemed to have some kind of inferiority complex about it. His fingers brushed the scar on his cheek. Everyone lamented this blemish on his handsome face. Yet did it seem to Maomao as if he almost liked it. Honestly, Maomao wasn't bothered by the scar. No person is perfect. Jinchi's appearance had been so flawless it hid what was inside. What was wrong with this modest alteration to the appearance he had been born with? It might have been a scar, but Maomao's father had stitched it up, and he had naturally done an excellent job. Each time Maomao applied salve or makeup to Jinchi's cheek, which was not infrequently, she felt the wound growing less pronounced under her fingers. I would rather say my face had been burned and continue wearing that makeup, Jinchi said. Eventually the colour would cease to come out, sir. But if you want a burn, I would be happy to help you. She could use him as a test subject for her burn medications at the same time. Stop that. After 20 days of wearing the makeup, a faint patch of red dye could still be seen on Jinchi's cheek. He had been using a dusting of white powder to conceal it. If I were actually burned, I think Geishan might collapse, but I admit it would be easier in its own way. The makeup is certainly somewhat troublesome. I have found myself rather relaxed during this trip, though. He seemed to be referring to the fact that no town girl would willingly make a move on a gloomy man with a burn on his face. At the same time, he was free of his usual desk work. Meanwhile, Maomao felt there was nothing to do but watch the scenery roll by from the carriage window. Her behind was getting sorer and sorer. Just thinking about the trip home was enough to depress her. Would you like to work on your horsemanship? I know you are getting tired of the carriage, he said. Yes, but I would rather have a proper bed. She had worked on hers during the trip. The problem was that she had rarely had a chance to use it, since other people, very pleased with her work, always seemed to be lying there instead. Ah, yes, I hope you will be able to make it even more comfortable than before. A shock of annoyance ran through Maomao. Jinchi had stolen her sleeping space more than anyone else. He would ride horseback as far as he wanted, and when he grew tired, he would come and relax. It was no wonder he found it so enjoyable. His Majesty did tell me to try to enjoy myself on this trip, Jinchi said with a slightly twisted smile. And to make a good choice. He did not say which choice he meant, but he referred to the choice of a bride. Many women had been gathered here for that very purpose. Whatever choice he made would involve politics. It might affect the government of the nation. He could strengthen ties with a neighbouring country. He could also gain the support of a domestic faction. Jinchi's own status might even change, depending on his decision. The fact that Sei Aishu had been willing to provide the venue for all this activity made their message clear. They wanted him to align himself with the West. No doubt that also explained why Aryu had brought his other daughter. Maomao wondered who he would pick. It did not really matter to her. She was just a humble apothecary, or so she thought. No sooner had she registered something brushing her fingers than a hand grabbed her wrist. It pulled her until her palm met his other hand, their fingers intertwined. His other hand was noticeably larger and rougher than hers. Long fingers clutched Maomao's hand, preventing her escape. Perhaps you would be so kind as to let go of me, sir. But if I let go, won't you run away? Are you going to do something I need to run from? You do make me want to hit you sometimes. Jinchi looked at Maomao like a wild animal hunting its prey. His expression made her think of a starving wild dog. It was not the face of the eunuch Jinchi or of the emperor's younger brother. It was someone else entirely. Not in the face, it would be too obvious. I wasn't actually going to hit you, I know, sir. Jinchi was not the type who would lay a hand on a young woman. No, wait, actually he was to make them vomit when they had ingested poison. I know you wouldn't do worse than pin me and force me to empty the contents of my stomach. You brought that on yourself. Why would you even drink poison? I'm not sure I know how to answer that. First-hand experience was so much more memorable than merely asking questions. That was all. Maomao wasn't any smarter than the average person, just a little more dedicated. Maomao wasn't very emotional, perhaps less so than most people. She felt sadness and happiness, anger and joy, but not as strongly as others. However, there were other emotions that people talked about which Maomao still didn't quite understand. She could feel Jinchi's pulse in the palm of his hand. He had started to sweat, and the place where their hands joined was slick. She looked up and saw long eyelashes lying low over eyes the color of obsidian. Those eyes watched her intently, from so close that she could see herself reflected in them. The courtesans had a saying, once you know it, it is hell, but the men also had a saying to know it was exactly why they went there. That word, that simple four-letter word with its O and its E, was sometimes called vulgar. Sometimes it turned out to be nothing more than a game, but some people said it was impossible to live without it. Jinchi's free hand reached for Maomao's head, his fingers stroking her hair, but they stopped behind her head. He said, "You are actually wearing it." His hand had found the hair stick, the silver piece with the moon and the poppy. Maomao had thought maybe it had come from Lahan, but apparently not. No wonder everyone had seemed so intrigued by it. She asked, "Oh, was it from you, Master Jinchi?" "The moon is nice, but the poppy seems a little strange." She was thinking about the white lady. The flower on her hair stick looked like a bigger version of the common poppy, but it was actually an opium poppy. "It could be used to make the drug. Please, I had that made before we left on this trip, to replace the other one." His voice came from above her. His chin rested on her head. His fingers played through her hair and she could feel his breath on her. Anyone who happened to see them might easily think they were in a close embrace. "Master Jinchi, please keep your distance." "Why should I? What will you do if someone sees us?" They were not the only ones who had slipped away from the banquet. The trees shielded them from sight, but there was no guarantee someone wouldn't happen by. Jinchi knew exactly why this banquet was being held. "Sir," Maomao said calmly, "Consort Lishu is not your niece. You don't have to worry about closeness of blood." Jinchi's face grew tighter, though. Maomao continued, wouldn't she be the safest choice? She would forget all about the moment she had seen Lishu and Basin gazing at each other. Yes, she would pretend it had never happened. Even if something were to blossom between them, it could have no meaning. It was better to act as if it had never existed. The safe choice. Like hell, Jinchi's voice in her ear was like a cold blade. His fingers stopped running through her hair and slid down to the nape of her neck, curling around her throat. Long, slim fingers began to press down. "It hurts." "Oh, does it?" It was painful, but Jinchi only squeezed harder. His other hand, still intertwined with hers, worked its way up her back. No, not this. He was going to twist her arm out of joint. With her throat crushed and her arm wrenched, Maomao's face contorted with agony. She tilted her head back, hoping to get some air. Her mouth flapped open like a fish. She must have looked ridiculous. Then Jinchi looked down at her. Finally, Maomao greedily sucked in the air she was suddenly allowed. A scent of flowers tickled her nose. It was jasmine. She had always imagined a celestial nymph would smell like peaches. Her thin lips felt dry and hot. The hand that had choked her moved to support the back of her head. His other hand disentangled itself from her fingers and wrapped around her waist. She did not know how long they sat that way. She only knew that Jinchi was looking down at her with a faintly triumphant expression. It was as if he saw that the breath had reached every corner of her body now. He wiped away the tears that had sprung to her eyes as she struggled to breathe. Then, Maomao felt a flash of intense anger. "I said that if you were going to kill me, you should do it with poison," she told him. "I refuse to let you poison yourself," Jinchi said, tracing her lips with his fingers. "You cannot pretend you did not know you were one of the candidates. As much as I'm sure you would like that." He wasn't finished. "Who was that man anyway? I'm sure you are not a dancer." So he had been watching them. "I was just paying for my drink," Maomao said. "It didn't cost much." She tried to look away, but with his hand on her head she really couldn't. Maomao was thinking quickly, trying to find a way out of this situation. "Just what use did you think I could be to you?" Jinchi asked. "Lahan accompanied you, didn't he? That is what everyone else will see." Maomao understood what Jinchi was suggesting. Maybe this is what Lahan had expected all along. She felt the anger rise within her. She would need to crush his toes thoroughly later. The La family was different from the other prominent clans. They did not align with any particular faction at court. Perhaps Maomao was a safe choice, as Rikusen had said. There was just one problem. You would make an enemy of you-know-who. She meant the man with the monocle, of course. She wondered what might have happened if he had been present. He would have made a very large scene. An escaped lion would have seemed like child's play in comparison. Jinchi shivered, but it quickly passed. We were going to continue things later, weren't we? She found herself pinned again. He was pushing her down onto the bench. His hand pressed firmly into her hair. More than just breath escaped her lips. She could now see his obsidian eyes and the feral look within them from only inches away. They shone brighter than any star, but there was also a subtle darkness to them. He was a man who had everything in life, and yet he sometimes seemed to hunger for something he struggled to satisfy. Why couldn't he choose someone else? There had to be someone who could give Jinchi what he was seeking. Many people certainly wanted him to choose someone. Why did he go out of his way to pick a creature who lacked that desire? She wanted to run. This could only bring more trouble and more uncertainty. She wanted to dodge all those problems, but those eyes, the eyes of an untamed dog, weren't going to let her escape. He intended to devour her, all to find something that wasn't really there. Maomao could only look back at him with empty eyes like those of a puppet or a doll. This seemed to further agitate the dog's anxieties. He leaned his weight onto Maomao as if he would crush her. He wants to suffocate me, she thought. He weighed at least twice what she did. She knew courtesans sometimes took customers 3 times their size. Didn't it hurt them? But even if it did, what would her sister Perrin think of such complaining? Perrin was a professional among professionals. You can't let him grab the initiative just because he's the customer, Maomao remembered her saying. Perrin had accompanied the advice with a sultry gesture. That was back when she had been teaching Maomao the courtesan's trade, very much over the younger woman's objections. Maomao said nothing. Honestly, perhaps it would have been better to remain still and quiet like a doll, or maybe not. What we can say is this: remembering Perrin meant remembering the techniques Perrin had taught her. She had drilled those techniques into her despite Maomao's protests. Perrin had worked Maomao to the verge of tears, until Maomao was able to perform them to her sister's satisfaction. Until those techniques became an instinctive reaction, not just a response. Therefore, Maomao could not be held responsible for what she was about to do. What did that mean? It meant that Maomao swallowed the saliva in her mouth with a heavy gulp. Her lips began to drift apart, then opened as an invitation to him. She slid closer to him instinctively. Jinchi's expression showed surprise and happiness, but it did not last long. Soon his body responded with gentle spasms and his grip on Maomao loosened. None of this was Maomao's fault. This was beyond her control. She responded to him with the most refined techniques of the pleasure quarter. How long was one beholden to a weathered old promise made as playful children? Ardu chuckled to herself. She sat on a cold rock in the garden, a blanket across her shoulders and a drink in her hand. The night air was truly cold here in the sandy capital. A good, strong alcohol was just what she needed. She had already put consort Lishu to bed, nearly feverish with tension. Now she was enjoying the drink she hadn't had a chance to savor before. I have no interest in anyone but you for my bride. Don't make promises you can't keep, she said in her mind. You do not have the authority. She knew perfectly well that some of his closest advisers had hounded him after she lost the ability to bear children, and her own hands were not exactly clean. She had tried to get her kind, beautiful friend to be unfaithful. Her poor friend had been forced into a marriage with a partner who had been chosen for her, purely to perpetuate the family line. Why not ignore that situation, Ardu had thought. Why not be a flower that bloomed at the very crest of the nation? But it hadn't gone the way she'd imagined. The conversation ended with her friend slapping Ardu's cheek as hard as she could and crying, "Don't mock me." Ardu knew this young woman to be kind, to be beautiful, to be intelligent. She had prepared a far better place, a more fitting place for her, and yet it had only made her friend furious. Ardu just did not understand the female heart. Perhaps it was because she herself was no longer a woman, or perhaps she had never understood it. She realized she had badly wounded her friend's pride. She had become a consort as an extension of their friendship without love. Then she had borne a child. Arduo had always thought she was a rather twisted woman, but apparently she still possessed what they called the maternal instinct. She loved the child she bore at the cost of her own womb more than anything. The infant was wrinkled, much like a monkey. Its hands waved, and they were so small they looked as though they would break with the slightest touch. The baby cried for milk. A nursemaid was present, but Arduo insisted on holding her own child. She tried to give the baby milk, but there wasn't enough to satisfy it. Arduo's body was no longer that of a woman. The infant was returned to the nursemaid. Racked with despair, Arduo thought only of her child. She thought only of how to help the tiny, vulnerable thing survive. She made a decision. They looked so much alike. Her child and his uncle had been born at almost the same time. She was concerned about her infant's failure to gain weight. Arduo gathered her strength to visit her mother-in-law.